Our disability is our greatest strength. It gives us the supervision to see the issues facing humanity from a more inclusive perspective and the grit to fight back against all odds. Welcome to Super Adaptables, the More Than Walking video podcast discussion.
Welcome, everyone, to Super Adaptables, the podcast where people of all abilities gather to discuss pressing issues that affect the disability community and their implications for the world at large. We are your hosts. I am Corey Pheez, C4 complete quadriplegic since 2005.
And I'm Jonathan Sigworth, C7 complete quadriplegic since 2006, both of us hailing from the great state of Connecticut.
Emphatically great state of Connecticut. And we are recording this on Thursday, the 16th of January, 2025. And in a little bit, we'll be discussing with some amazing fellow Super Adaptables about scrutinizing social safety nets.
And before we do, I just want to let you know, as always, that Super Adaptables this year is made possible in part by a grant from the Christopher and Dana Reeve Foundation's National Paralysis Resource Center. The information provided and opinions expressed in these podcasts do not necessarily reflect the views of the Christopher and Dana Reeve Foundation. For more information about the Foundation's National Paralysis Resource Center, visit www.christopherreeve.org. Also, the views expressed in this podcast do not necessarily reflect those of More Than Walking either, but belong to us as individual speakers.
So it's no secret that millions of Americans, both with disabilities and not, face a variety of barriers. Some examples include the need for improvements in technology that allow people who are physically and visually impaired the ability to navigate the internet more easily, as well as access to broadband in lower income neighborhoods, healthcare coverage to affordable and accessible housing, and keep income and disability in mind when drafting blueprints rather than trying to figure out how to accommodate individuals afterwards.
These types of challenges are unique and complex, but making adaptations such as these highlights the need to protect our social safety nets. The National Library of Medicine reported in 2021 that 11.6% of the U.S. population lived in poverty. According to another report, the poverty rate would be twice as high if programs didn't exist to subsidize incomes. Well, Super Adaptables, let's dive deeper into these issues and get to the bottom of why these institutions and programs are important and need to be preserved and reformed. So with that, we would like to welcome our first guest, Josh Basil, a C4-5 quadriplegic from Maryland. Josh is the founder and president of Determined to Heal and Spinalpedia.
It's great to be here, Jonathan and Corey. Thanks for inviting me.
And we also have Heather Miller joining us from Nebraska. Heather is a certified benefits counselor at Spinalpedia.
Hi, thanks for having me, guys.
And I'm so happy to have both of them with us. Spinalpedia has a great relationship with More Than Walking. We collaborate to provide peer mentoring, especially to newly injured and their families, as well as those looking for employment. So you should all check out spinalpedia.com to find out more.
And also joining us are Joe Short and Tom Wade. They're independent living advocates and they work for Independence Northwest. More Than Walking is currently working with their organization to get the word out here in CT about social safety nets and what changes can be made so that current and future generations can continue to benefit from these programs. And we hope that these discussions will serve as an example to those of you viewing out there.
And, our goal from these discussions, again, this month we're focusing on an overview of different social safety net programs, why they're important, how they can be improved. But our real goal is to equip people at a local level, whether you're in Connecticut or Maryland or Nebraska or whatever state you may be in, to take action where you live and to find out how these programs, because they do differ state by state, can be improved in your local area. With that, I want to jump to the first question. This year, many people are concerned that the broad social safety nets that protect and support us in case of poverty and or disability are under threat. Still, social safety nets can seem abstract for those who have never dealt with these challenges. So we wanted to ask from our expert panel gathered today, what are the primary programs everyday Americans should be aware of? And what are some compelling examples of how they could be impacted by them?
So when it comes down to social safety nets, is nobody truly wants to be on them, but they have to be on them to survive. And it's one of those things that they're there to, they started in the 1960s and the 1970s, both kind of Medicaid and Medicare of sorts, to be a resource for families where basically if they ended up becoming poor, they would have something to be able to pick them up. And then as time went on, it grouped in the elderly, persons with disabilities, and children. But it's still tied to the component of you have to be poor to be in these programs. So in the 1980s, they had the asset limit for, let's say, SSI moved to 2,000. It has not changed since the early 80s, which is absolutely ridiculous. The cost of living has changed dramatically since the 80s. It happened before I was born, the last time it was changed. And that's almost 40 years ago. So we're looking at programs that a lot of them are outdated, but they're essential to be able for people with disabilities to have access to and be in the community. It's one of those other things that I do want to talk about, how a lot of times people feel bad being on social safety net programs. It's so far from the truth. We all, our families, our friends, our people that are in our lives have all paid into the system so that if one day you needed help or to get support to get off the ground or to be able to really be in the community, that's what these programs are about. They're there to support people that are in need of them.
Absolutely. And that $2,000 asset limit you're talking about, that's related to which programs exactly? That is
Medicaid. Related to SSI, Social Security income. And it's basically said if you want to have access to SSI, you have to have less than $2,000 in assets. And then there's all these income components to it as well. But the asset one is a pretty strict one.
Awesome. And SSI and SSDI, these are the cash benefit programs that basically allow you to pay for groceries, to pay for everyday needs. If you're injured, can no longer work, or
if you're
retired.
an SSI, you can automatically ties you directly into your state's Medicaid. SSI is a great program for those that need it, and there's also some work incentive programs around it as well. So if you're in SSI and you end up starting to work, so typically Heather could give you the better number, but it's some $900 a month that you can typically get in SSI. And if you start working, every $2 of earnings, it reduces your SSI payment down by $1 until you get down to zero. And once you get down to zero, you automatically get enrolled in 1619B program, which allows you to work. And believe it or not, the more quadriplegic or the more of a disability that you have, and the more the system spends on you, it actually gives you the ability to make even more money over certain thresholds. And so there's a lot of really cool programs within the Social Security system as well.
The federal benefit rate in 2025 for SSI is a whopping $967. Even in rural Nebraska, where I live, I don't know that I could live on that amount every month. I agree with Josh. There needs to be updates to the both resource limit and dollar amount. SSI is intended to cover food and shelter, and I don't know how a lot of individuals can make that happen at $967. That being said, Josh touched on some really important issues that I've seen it in over a decade of being a certified benefits counselor, which basically means I'm very aware of Social Security's rules, regulations for Medicaid, Medicare. SSI does have that automatic tie to Medicaid, which is great. That's much needed for a lot of people. I've seen it more and more and more working with individuals with spinal cord injuries or who are experiencing a visual impairment, that it's not just a nice safety net, but it is paramount to life and living and the ability to work. And that's what I think, we're seeing some movement across the country with what's called Medicaid buy-in programs. And don't let the buy-in confuse you. They don't all have premiums that you have to buy into. Some do, some don't. But these are Medicaid programs specifically for people who are high wage earners, but they have to have services that only Medicaid can provide. That would be personal care assistance, skilled nursing assistance. We don't want to limit someone's ability to contribute to the economy, to make a livable wage, solely because they need a specific set of medical services that are only provided in this one path. So there are a lot of different work incentives, workarounds that we can use to help people not only retain or keep more of their cash benefit, but in some cases, the most important thing is the Medicaid insurance. And there are a lot of ways, it varies by state, Some states are wonderful. We've seen a handful of states move to no income or asset limits for the Medicaid buy-in, meaning you can make as much money as possible and pay taxes and go out into the economy and spend money, but retain your life or death services that you're receiving.
And Medicaid is really important because it is the only insurance anywhere that really covers the caregiving that someone with a severe disability requires.
99% of the time.
99% of the time.
So there's some people could have been fortunate to purchase what's known as long-term disability insurance, but is very, very rare in the spinal cord injury community for you to have purchased that. And then you basically were gambling that something was going to go wrong down the road. Then you get an injury. That's really one of the only other ways. And then sometimes within the VA, if you're a veteran.
Yeah, good point. Josh, that's a good point that you brought up. A lot of people don't have the wherewithal to kind of pre-plan because you don't know the level of expense you're gonna incur if you should have a severe injury. Actually, I have a friend who purchased long-term disability insurance. Years later, she wound up getting hit by a drunk driver, and it helped to pay for a lot of her medical expenses. But I wanted to ask, Tom first, and Joe can add to that as far as being independent living advocates, knowing what Heather said, that people can't afford to live off of that cash benefit, grateful for it, but can't afford to necessarily live on it. How do the people that you encounter kind of reconcile balancing between being a recipient of those cash benefits and actually trying to live and thrive in the community?
But I'd like to make a comment first about what Heather said regarding asset and income limits for those people who are working and how it affects with their benefits and different programs. And slowly but surely, Heather, I am shocked to see that there are some states that are finally adopting that. That's a push that's been taking place since, I think, 1997. During the 90s, we started the Ticket to Work plan, right? Wasn't that it? And I know in Connecticut,
Yes.
In 1997, they set the income and asset limits for the Med Connect program, for those people who are working, but still want to be able to keep medical benefits if their employer wasn't supplying it. And it's just a great progression. It's something that's way overdue, but thank God it's taking place. And Corey, going back to what you said, it's a fine balance, and Joe can attest to it much better than myself. He's well versed in that area. But there's a really fine balance between working, not working, getting your $900 a month, and then being able to afford perhaps a Section 8 if you can find a decent place to live in, and then your food. Hopefully you can get some type of benefit. So it's just you're buying your food. And then, what if you want a motor vehicle? Or what are you going to do for transportation? Which I think one of the things we talked about the other day was one of the most important issues for so many people with disabilities, and anyone really, is how do I get to and from? If I am going to work, how do I get there? As we know, public transportation is not always that efficient, and having your own private vehicle involves, insurance, property tax, maintenance, and so on. So again, it's just that I know I've said it before, but it's a really fine balance. And again, Joe can really pinpoint some specifics much better than I can.
Although before Joe chimes in, Tom, I just want us to give you some time to talk about how this relates to food assistance, especially school meal programs, things that you said you were familiar with. And maybe you can talk about, how are they supposed to work? How are they structured? Are these state programs? Are these federal programs? And how can they be improved, as well as, what are some misconceptions surrounding those programs?
Sure. One of the things we were talking about was the National School Lunch Program, which during the pandemic, there was funds available so everyone had a chance to have free lunch, regardless of income. And I'm not sure how many states also adopted or used the money for free breakfast as well. And it was incredibly successful. So you still have some states that are taking money, are using their own money, as well as some of the federal funding, which still exists. The pandemic money is gone. Again, some states do not take advantage because they see the program as a form of, quote unquote, welfare or a handout. And some states say they can't afford the administrative costs involved with the program, as well as some of the technical issues, such as coordinating with each local district within the state. And, and ultimately, of course, too, the program, like so many others, are federally funded by taxpayers. But we have to keep in mind that, we also use federal funds that are taxpayer funded for colleges and hospitals and infrastructure and so on, things you wouldn't even imagine. Stadiums, think about that one.
I mean, and working at a Center for Independent Living, which is, of course, tasked with helping people with disabilities live independently in the community, who are the people that you interact with that are taking advantage or that really depend on these school meal programs?
Well, my experience really has been as a teacher. As we had said before, I taught in a public high school for 30 years prior to becoming an advocate. I had worked as an advocate actually like 30, I'm aging myself here, 36 years ago. But seeing it within an urban setting was actually very cool to see the response and how good it was for the students. And it's, it's consistently shown that students or kids are able to focus and concentrate, leading to, better behavior and better test scores if, you're totally focused on that. Less discipline problems and less time being sick with, a full belly. So whether it's breakfast, lunch, or both, it is proven to be, a great investment. And, there's some students who won't take the free lunch. Certain schools, you have that certain stigma that if you get the free lunch or you're seen with that card that you're poor. Where I taught in Bridgeport, and some of these other urban centers, there's so many students that are eligible for free lunch that there is no stigma because everybody gets it. And that's one of the, going to what you're saying about how things could change, is that when everybody has access to a free lunch, for example, then there is no stigma involved, and everyone has that option. And people also often look at their Bridgeport, Waterbury, if you're in Connecticut, that is, the inner city, and think that's the only place where there's a high need. But I mean, you can look at the statistics with the Connecticut State Board of Education in places like Ansonia, Bloomfield, their high schools have kids, 80% of the kids are eligible for free lunch. So, I mean, it's applicable everywhere, and it works.
And I think, too, you said something that's very important. Like in the high urban centers, this stigma is created. And I think that it has a pervasive effect on the rest of the way that the country views urban populations as, welfare recipients, and they're just leaning hard on the system when we have other things that we need to be paying for, and that people need to stop being lazy or get up and get a job and not, just hold fast to what the government is actually providing for people, because other people are just as much as in need as they are. But I wanted to get Joe in real quick just to, give some more background information with regard to dealing with the Medicaid and Medicare issues.
Yeah, thank you, Corey. And I don't know if I mentioned this before, but both Tom and I have spinal cord injuries as well. I'm a C6, he's a C4. So I've been paralyzed since 2002 and have utilized both Medicaid and Medicare. And I'm on the Medicare for working disabled, or MedConnect, however you want to say it, and that allows me to be able to work and still receive the Medicaid services for PCAs. And on that program there, you're allowed to make up to $75,000 a year. Of course, that's what they claim. In reality, anything over 150% of the poverty line, you pay a percentage on. But nonetheless, it allows you access to the Medicaid services. And Social Security, as far as that goes, you have SSI and SSDI. For anybody who's new to that, it's supplemental security income and Social Security disability insurance. And one is based off of your income paid in. The other one is a set amount. I run into the issue a lot of times with my consumers being on SSI, and if they're living with their family and they don't have and they have the support from them, they're considered dependents on the family, so their SSI is reduced. Plus, they don't have they have a very limited, if any, access to the SNAP benefits. because they don't have living expenses. And the SNAP benefits is Supplemental Nutritional Assistance Program, and that's supposed to give them additional money for groceries and everything of that nature. Because let's face it, the SSI amount is just $940 a month. That's not really enough to live off of, and be able to pay your shelter expenses and be able to afford food. But going back to the Social Security and Medicaid, they are a safety net that a lot of us rely on, because you have your guaranteed income from that, and with the work incentive programs, both SSI and SSDI, that's the main goal. And there's there's organizations, Bureau of Rehabilitation Services, that can help individuals get back into the workplace and be contributing to the society and everything, and not be dependent on it. One of the misconceptions about Social Security disability is that you're unable to work because you have a disability, and I hear it so many times. I can't tell you how many times in a week that I hear, "I'm disabled, I can't work," and it's like, no, you might not be able to work at the suggested gainful activity level, but you do have the ability to work at some capacity. And that's why those work incentive programs are there. They do provide a safety net. When you're first getting onto SSDI, you have what's called the trial work period. And that allows you to make as much money as you possibly can make, and it doesn't affect your benefits. And then it tapers off from there. So it allows people to get back into the workforce without that fear of, I'm going to lose my benefits. And that's the biggest once you get on these safety nets, there's that giant fear that it's going to be taken away. You're not going to have medical, and you're not going to have that Social Security income coming in. And it really creates a lot of internal fear for a lot of individuals that I've run across.
Good points. Some good points, Joe. But I just wanted to quickly go back where Joe started. Yes, I'm a high quad, as we say. So my injury is C3 on 4. This is Tom, by the way. My injury was in 1973, so I'm one of those old quads. But don't want to let that be known. And just going back to what Joe said as well, as far as the Med Connect program goes, and the ability to work, have income, and have assistance playing PCAs is just, where would we be without it? Right, Joe? I mean, I'm not sure who else may be on that program, but it is invaluable. I mean, I think the asset and income limits need to be eliminated, but they are just such a huge part of my everyday life. Couldn't do it without them. And in 1986, when I first started working, a lot of these things just didn't exist.
Yeah, and they're true lifelines. And I know we've talked a lot about Medicaid and Medicare and Social Security, and we've touched on vocational rehab and the school meal programs. I also just want to give a quick overview of other resources that we haven't touched on that are out there. Josh, can you tell us a little bit about state loan programs or asset management or protection advocacy networks?
So much about navigating these programs comes down to playing the asset game. So there's always asset tests, or not always. Most of the time there's asset tests, meaning what is the state or what is the program considered to be a countable resource? And let's just say for Social Security, for Medicaid purposes, you're allowed to have a home, one home that you live in. You're allowed to have the furnishings of that home, and you're allowed to have one vehicle for the most part. And then they say everything else, a lot of times it might be cash. It could be stocks, bonds, retirement accounts. Sometimes retirement accounts are exceptions for certain programs. But those assets, if you go over a certain amount, you get kicked out and you become ineligible. So there are certain things that exist now. One of them is called an ABLE account. And an ABLE account is a powerful tool for basically, think of it almost like a bank account or almost like a college savings account. Were built around 529s, but it's like having a bank account through your state or another state. You don't always have to choose the one that's in your state. And if you were injured before the age of 26, so 25 and younger, you can have access to this account and basically be able to put $19,000 a year into it. Sometimes you can put in a little bit more if you don't have a retirement account with your job. In 2026, they're going to be increasing that age to 46 and under. So if you're 45 and younger, and that your injury took place before that time, you actually can also have access. And it's a great way. You can have up to $100,000 at any given moment in that account, or sometimes between $300,000 and $500,000 lifetime in that account. So it's a great tool. There's also trusts for somebody that is injured or that has a disability or spinal cord injury. You can rely on what's known as a first-party special needs trust. And that type of trust either is one that you can set up or a family member can set up, and it's for your benefit. So you can actually put money into it to reduce your assets under that to those $2,000 amounts. That first-party special needs trust also can be known as a pooled trust, which is more of a community fund and trust that exists in a lot of different places and works very similarly, but somebody kind of oversees it for you. And then there's third-party special needs trusts, where these are more better for estate planning purposes. So if like a friend or a family wants to leave money to you upon their death, they can put that money into a third-party special needs trust. So when they do die and that money goes there, it doesn't impact your benefits.
Josh, can I interrupt for a second, Josh?
Absolutely.
You've got some great stuff. Are there restrictions on the ABLE account as to where and what the money can be spent on? And the same goes with the trust?
Yep. So a trust is going to be a little bit more restrictive. It's really got to go towards your medical and accessibility needs. The ABLE account has a little bit broader of a definition on quality of life, which I've found it's really almost anything that can touch you or benefit your life. So it could be anything from your medical expenses, assistive technology, medical supplies, caregiving. It could even be for food or shelter. So it's something like you could buy yourself food with the ABLE account, but you couldn't buy like your girlfriend or your wife or your kids' food with it. It has to go directly to touch you.
And is that set up through a state program?
Yep. And there's some really cool resources where you can shop around different ABLE accounts where you can do like a comparison, put 3 states in, and it goes side by side what their program's rules are. But you don't always have to go with the state that you live in. There's a bunch of states across the country that allows you to have access to their ABLE accounts as well. And one of the cool parts is depending on the state, there's usually a financial institution overseeing it. So you can put the money in that ABLE account, and then they can give you different ways of investing that money. You can't really buy like an individual stock and bond, but you can actually put it into something that's an account that's a little bit more aggressive to make more money, or a moderate investment portfolio. So it gives people with disabilities ability to also grow their money as well.
Can I chime in? Can I just chime in on that, Josh? I find the big difference between an ABLE account and a special needs trust or a pooled trust or anything like that people need to be aware of is that an ABLE account you can set up yourself. It's not going to cost you anything. The average person is setting up a pooled trust or a special needs trust. I've heard of people paying up to $2,500 just to be able to set up a special needs trust because it has to go through an attorney. Yep. It's routine by an attorney. And, granted, an ABLE account is a limited amount per year. Like I said, $19,000. I thought it was only $16,000. So I got a little bit of education myself today. That's the nice part about the ABLE account is you can set it up, and it's such a broad spectrum compared to that limited view of what a special needs trust or a pooled trust. And with a pooled trust, that's more of individuals that are over 65, correct?
No, so you could be under the age of 65 with a pooled trust. Okay. One of the best things about an ABLE account is you don't have to ask somebody to take the money out. So exactly. You get the freedom to have. Some states allow you to have actually a checking account. Most all of them let you have a debit account.
So for all of these things, though, it's kind of interesting because these are not social safety net programs. Like these asset management, these are tools that people with disabilities are forced to use and sometimes pay significantly out of pocket in order to access things like the insurance they need to survive, or the basic things that they need to get groceries and to be able to get transportation and to be able to work. And, we'll go into a deeper dive on some of these things in later months this year. But just to point out, with ABLE account right now, you only qualify if your disability occurred before your 26th birthday. For some reason, if you were 27 and you broke your neck, sorry, you're not allowed to save for your future or save, apart from the asset limit.
Until 2026.
Until 26, right? Until 2026. So those types of rules are and kind of loopholes are there, but they're necessary in order to be able to navigate the program.
So you guys have all worked closer to these things, to these programs and what have you than, other folks. But what are like some of the different funding and control structures for these programs? And, what are some broad strategies that we can use to improve the efficiency and the impact of these programs? Because one thing that John said is like you have to have all these different ways to navigate it, and they feel more like a leash and restrictive. And I can't speak so much to some of the other programs. Me as a veteran, how it works in that administration is that they have a rating system, and yes, it is based off of your eligibility. So if you're at 100% disabled and you're service connected, meaning that your injury occurred while you were active, or if you apply afterwards, but your disability is a result to your service, you can still be open to getting benefits. But they give you a set amount of dollars and you manage it each month on the first. There is no restriction there, and it's also labeled under entitlement, so you're not taxed as well, which helps you to save a huge amount of money. And there's no income or asset limits. And me and John have talked at length about how the healthcare system within the VA is insulated and it works well for a marginalized group of individuals. It should also be working the same way. But what are some of the broad strategies to improving efficiency and impact of these programs in you guys' view?
In my view, lobbying, putting it right in front of the face of your legislators, your representatives. That seems to be how things get done. And Corey, I didn't know you're a veteran. Thank you for your service. I took a big veteran benefits training, and it was very eye-opening for me, having the background from the Social Security side of things and then learning how the VA works. I'm kind of an advocate here for rural America because that's where I grew up. I was born and raised. And I can tell you veterans where I live have about an hour and a half drive to the nearest VA hospital to get services. And trust me, there's no public transportation where I live. So it's all done via volunteers, people who are retired that can still drive, that can take people to these appointments. And I just feel like lobbying and being activists and showing up on the Hill, making yourself be heard is the way that things are changing.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I guess the question though is lobbying for what, right? Like we're facing, a new administration here in the United States that's talking about reforming and changing a lot of these things. From consumer point of view, maybe not in the best way. There's a lot of talk of privatization of some of these benefit programs like the VA, continuing to put Medicaid management in the hands of private equity in different states. What are the best ways, from your point of view, that these can be fixed, and what are some bad solutions that you've heard? And just kind of touching on the VA thing, yeah, we have universal health care. It's called Veterans Administration. Why can't we expand that to all of us and make it so that veterans don't have to travel across their state to go to the one facility? Like, what if that were every hospital? Wouldn't that be great if we just kind of had universal health care for everyone everywhere?
That would make it too easy, Jonathan.
It's
easy. In the States, we don't do things easy. No, but
and I think it's important to remember that these federal agencies need to be efficient, fair with their payments to recoup these costs. Because I can tell you in my little hometown, there's a significant issue with what Medicaid will reimburse or what VA benefits will reimburse to our providers in rural America. And I don't know the answer. I wish I did, but I can see, when we talked about Medicaid buy-ins finding a state that has already done it and modeling that in your state is the best route to go. Don't reinvent the wheel on those kinds of things.
And when something's broken, we have to, as persons with disabilities, recognize that we are advocates for life, and no one's going to fight harder for us than we're going to fight for ourselves. So we have to speak up. We have to let our voices be heard, our wheels be heard, and go work with government and legislators where, all right, there's a barrier that makes this program impossible for you or others to be able to get to that next level or to continue in it. It needs to be changed or it needs to be modified in some way. And being able to work with legislators to do that is how things get changed. Unfortunately, the reason why the system is so complicated and difficult is that every state gets to design their Medicaid programs, and every state does it differently. And then having to rely on federal funding and matching dollars and this and that, and then the politics gets involved with it. It complicates it to a point where it's like, as John said and Heather said and others, if we could create a fair, consistent program across the country. Like, I live in Maryland and my caregiver is in Maryland, but if I moved to another state, I would have to start all over from scratch. So I'm literally stuck in Maryland for the rest of my life if I want to have my caregiving covered. And it's little things like that that just don't make sense to me. But
and I'm also wondering too, like, politicians have often spoke about, reforming like the tax code and it not being this like thick group of papers that you have to read through. And so I wanted to ask Tom and Joe, like, when an applicant is looking for resources to help themselves get off the system and become more independent, what is the application process like? And maybe that can speak to about efficiency if we, do something with the level of paperwork to recognize if a person is eligible to receive whatever subsidy that they're looking for.
Are you talking for rental subsidies or
for
any of these programs?
For any of these programs.
Section 8.
That's usually where it begins at, is just how do you even qualify for it? So from your view, to make it more efficient, like, what does it take when somebody calls you and they're like, hey, listen, I need the following in order to, try to live and do things effectively? What is that process like?
Well, sadly, a lot of the low income housing has a minimum income limit that is higher than most people's income. So if you're on, say, SSI, supplemental security income, you're on SSI, you're only making $940 a month, and you want to qualify for low income subsidized housing, and they've got a $16,000 a year minimum income limit, then what do you do with that person? They're on a state or a federal program that's for low income, but they don't make enough money to qualify to even apply to low income housing. So it's tough. And going through Section 8, that's done through a lottery system. Your chances of that are like hitting the Powerball. And, once you got it, then you have that fear of coming off of it. So it makes everything. So as far as housing goes, I mean, I've gone through with people and put in 40, 50 different applications, and they're still on wait lists for, average wait list is 2 to 5 years long for subsidized housing. I mean, that's a whole different topic in itself. Just the housing market here in the state, and I'm sure it's like this across the country.
I mean, that brings up another kind of general issue that we've heard a lot about, especially in some of the one-on-one mentoring that we're doing with Spinalpedia. If we hear about veterans, I just spoke with a family the other day where the wife with the disability was injured 6 years after 6 years of being in the military, but became a quadriplegic when she was not on duty. And because she hadn't been working, for those prior 6 years, she doesn't have enough work experience to qualify for disability. And she's not eligible for Medicaid because her husband is in active duty and making too much. So there are so many different examples of where you're in one program and it disqualifies you for another, for one reason. There's these wires get crossed, and you end up being eligible for nothing.
Yeah, I can't tell you how many times in a week, I hear of people talking about wanting to get divorced because just to be able to be eligible for benefits. And you have a couple that's really on the poverty level because it's only the husband supporting the wife or the wife supporting the husband who has a disability, but they don't qualify for any of these benefits because with their limited income, they're over the threshold. And it's that right there is probably one of the biggest problems in our state is, once you count the assets and income limit of the spouses together, and it really disqualifies them for a lot of programs. And anyone who is disabled, it turns them away from ever wanting to get married.
I would say the key is anybody listening to this point is it is complicated, but you don't have to do it alone. There's local independent living centers. There's our team over at Spinalpedia. We worked with over 400 families one-on-one last year to help navigate this stuff. So it's just you gotta be willing to receive help, ask for help, whether it's your local independent living center, connecting with us over at Spinalpedia, connecting with More Than Walking. We just have to have a conversation to map out kind of your unique journey. Because like I said earlier, it's complicated because every single state has its own unique rules and every program has its own unique rules. So as long as you map out kind of your unique story and variables, you can kind of create different options and paths moving forward. And at the end of the day, it's up to you to choose which path you take. But it's good to have options.
And Heather here, she had mentioned she's a certified benefits counselor. Every here in Connecticut, I'm sure it's probably like this across the state. Everybody who's disabled and wants to go back to work, they have the ability to meet with a certified benefits counselor to hone in on just their specifics, and because everybody is completely different, and to look at what the impact is. And I'm sure Heather,
Yes. Every state has a WIPA, WIPA, Work Incentive Planning and Assistance Program. A really, really good website to find that is choosework.ssa.gov. And there's a find help tool. There's also employment networks in the Ticket to Work program. That's what I specifically work in, is counseling beneficiaries who are going back to work. All of those are free services. WIPA services are free services. Ticket to Work services are free services to anyone that meets the qualifications to be in the program. And I can tell you, just earlier this morning, I met with a young man who was a victim of a road rage and is now a quadriplegic. And when I started explaining, hey, guess what, you can work, I could just see the light in his eyes back again, because he had always believed that he couldn't go back to work, that he couldn't do this or that because that would affect the Medicaid that he needs to live, not just work, to live. And being able to share those things with people, because it's not, you can't do a Google search and find this information. It's just not possible. There's so many different caveats and different things we have to address. Do they have children? Do we need to look at the unit as a family? How does work, going to affect a child's benefits? If you have a disabled child, how is work going to affect that? There's so many different facets. Long-term disability. I can tell you, I work with someone, she was so smart, signed up for long-term disability. A month later, got into a massive car accident. Now she's a quadriplegic, and her long-term disability is way too much to ever think about being qualified for Medicaid. So there's things like that there's so many different paths that your journey to work or on benefits can take, that almost each and every person is individualized. And that's why these programs like WIPA and Ticket to Work and getting proper benefits counseling are so important, so that you don't wake up someday and realize I have a $50,000 overpayment on my Social Security disability.
And it's so important that you guys point out the hope and solutions and different resources that are available to navigate this complex system. And just really briefly, Josh and Tom and Joe, as advocates, what is the most effective way? What's if people are learning about this and say, well, I want to advocate at my local level, what's the most effective message that they can give to their local representatives and senators, and even at the national level? What is the message that we should be sending? Is it, hey, we should scrap this and replace it with a, cash benefit for everyone, level the playing field? Or what are the practical things that we should say to our representatives to make the system better?
We have to share our stories. We have to show that a problem exists and that it needs thinking, and it needs fixing. Like we can't solve a problem without knowing what the problem is first or what barrier exists. Unfortunately, all these programs might have been created with the best intent possible, but then you have so many unique stories, disabilities, functionalities, variables with different families, and then people fall through the cracks. And what we have to do is we have to learn how to seal the cracks or make it stronger to support everybody that's supposed to be supporting within the mission of its original intent. And if its original intent sucks, let's create a new program that has a better mission or a better intent. We can't fix things unless we're willing to bring it to people's attention, fight for it, and then really play within the system, the game, the advocacy game. So like right now in the Medicaid buy-in world, so we talked about Medicaid buy-ins allow people with disabilities that want to work to have higher income. Since the 1997, 1999, over 48 states created programs around their Medicaid buy-in. Tennessee, or actually 47. Tennessee was one of those states that did not even have it at all up until last year. And an advocate on the ground said, you know what, this is now forcing me. I just had a spinal cord. This is forcing me to get divorced, get rid of every single one of my assets to my name to become poor. And even then, my SSDI doesn't allow me to even get into the program. There is like a tsunami of all these variables that just showed how the system was broken in Tennessee. He ended up bringing his story to the state legislature. And on his first try, with advocates on the ground and different disability coalitions, got a Medicaid buy-in passed through the Senate, through the House, signed by the governor, that now allows you to have unlimited income, unlimited assets, and work past the age of 65. And it would not have happened without that advocacy on the ground. So this can happen. We're seeing it across the country. At least the Medicaid buy-ins change state by state by state with the right stories and the right advocates.
As far as the representative, like I said, you can't change what they don't know. And if they don't, they realize the housing issue is always going to be a problem. But as far as the asset limits, go back to what you were saying about the Medicaid. A lot of that the Husky C is considered the income and asset limit hasn't changed in 50 years, and we're working on hopefully trying to change that. And it's been a topic in the legislature. But the more people that could show up and represent what that means and what that does to their livelihood, that's where it's going to change. And I think back to when the state here in Connecticut was trying to get rid of the Medicare Savings Program, and the amount of people that would have impacted in the support that every individual showed to the legislator of what that would impact to their livelihood. Cut off their source of funding for prescription drugs and supplemental insurance. It was like an instant turnaround of, maybe we shouldn't cut this program, and they don't realize the impact of cutting programs would have on people's ability to even afford groceries because they're spending the money on medications.
I'm just going to wrap it up with going along with Josh and Joe said, and that is, they don't know if we don't tell them. And I think our own personal stories are the most powerful thing we can use. Whether it's ourselves, the people we work with, our friends, neighbors, but that really, I think, is the most effective way to make any type of change. That, and you need numbers. Years ago, I tried to do something about the asset and income limitations for people who might want to get married with the MedConnect program. And didn't matter how many phone calls I made, letters I wrote, the bottom line with a local senator and rep and someone from the governor's office at the time was that if you have numbers and you can bring it to the Capitol, with a fairly well-written proposal, then you can maybe do something. But however, if you don't, it's not going to go. So tell our stories, get numbers, and make a move.
I do not have a disability. I'll just put that out there. But one of the things I have learned from working with Josh for the last 5+ years is that if you're sending letters, put a picture in it so that they can see, especially in this population, you have a disability that people can visually see. And Josh swears by that. I counsel all my folks who are contacting their representatives to do the same, because it's just more impactful. And then don't shut up. Be the squeaky wheel all the time. That's one of the best things I've learned from Josh so far in advocacy, is let them see it.
That's a great point. Let them see you, not only the circumstances in your life, but you as a person, and recognize that they're talking to another human being. They're not just talking to a person who's complaining about something.
Yeah, I mean, this has been, I think, vital. And I think to anybody viewing it, the one biggest takeaway that you should know is that there are people just like you who are advocating for your overall success and independence. And as Heather stated, she doesn't have a disability, yet she wants to see other people be able to work, provide for their families and for themselves, to be the best version of themselves and contribute more to society. And that shouldn't be lost to anybody that's viewing. We are all individuals who benefit from a variety of these social safety nets, whether it's Medicare, Medicaid, veterans benefits, etc. But the work isn't done simply because one piece of legislation was passed 30 years ago. It's progressive. The stories change, demographics change, and individuals, because they have a disability, don't remain in the same state for the rest of their lives, nor do they wish to stay in the same state. And those changes are detrimental, or could be detrimental, to their livelihood. And so we just need to have a better system that its efficacy works for everyone. That may include lessening the amount of paperwork to process it. It may be that, you change eligibility criteria, that more families can be able to apply. We have an example within the VA of how it works for veterans who qualify for services. So why not look at all citizens the same way? And one final thought, me and John can't express this enough. You may not be disabled now, but you may become disabled later. You are going.
We all wind up here one way or another.
We all get here one way or the other. And if it's not you, it could be your child or your grandchild, and you want to see them be successful. But thank you guys for participating in our More Than Walking video podcast discussion.
Stay tuned and join us next month, and sign up for the More Than Walking newsletter at morethanwalking.com to learn about the topic we will cover next. Also, like, comment, and subscribe to our More Than Walking YouTube channel to watch each podcast. And we'll be dropping new episodes every Monday. And you can follow wherever you listen to podcasts. Just search for More Than Walking.
So until then, remain encouraged, stay hopeful, and above all else,
keep adapting.